Hola and welcome to Tuesday Tactics. All right, so today we are going to talk about the real cost of pivots on your business, primarily like your one person business, really. And for me, I used to think that pivoting was a form of progress because I would be like, I was getting started, I'm plowing forward as quickly as I can, and I'm embracing kind of like the startup mindset of, you know, build really quickly, fail fast, take imperfect action, like all of those things. And because I know that they work, like when you're building a business, right? So I'd test different audiences, I'd test different messages, I'd test different offers. And when things wouldn't pan out, I would pivot and then I'd pivot again and then I'd pivot again. And I later realized that like basically while I was sometimes taking a step forward, I was just as often I was taking a step or two or three backwards. And the reason is I didn't realize at the time what the real cost of vision switching was when it came to pivoting really important parts of my business. Now, like don't get me wrong, I'm an advocate of the scientific method of business building, right? Like go test your hypothesis, and use all those lean startup practices that go into building a really good business. But like here's the thing, if you're not looking at the total cost of each pivot, then it's really easy to end up on a treadmill where you've got the speed dialed all the way up, you're sweating your ass off, and you're not really making any progress. And like just everything about it feels like you're working hard, but you're not going anywhere, or dial that sucker up fast enough and you actually go backwards. And the reason is like, here's why. Like if you actually can, if you want to find work that you love doing for clients that you actually respect at rates that you want or deserve, you have to establish a brand, right? Like you have to establish a brand in your area of expertise. And when you do that, like when you establish yourself as an expert in a particular market, you end up like you automatically create the opportunity to charge more for your services, right? Because you're the specialist, you're the expert. It's the expert premium that people pay for the peace of mind of knowing that you know what you're talking about. And there's two aspects of branding that solopreneurs like myself, that are stuck in this perpetual state of pivoting, oftentimes like don't realize. And the first is brands take a long time, not a long time, but brands take time to establish, right? They are a reputation. They take time to develop. That's why they're so damn powerful. A strong brand improves your credibility, and it increases or at least accelerates the rate of trust that you're going to have with people because it's taken time for your brand to develop. The second thing people often don't realize is that the return on brand building, like the return on your effort in building a brand, is exponential. It's not a linear line. Okay. Like the hardest part is at the beginning because no one knows you, no one knows what you do. And so you've got to work really hard to get like to start pushing the flywheel. Then you get some traction, then it gets a little bit easier. And as time goes on, your brand power starts to compound exponentially, and that's why when I think of pivots, the cost of vision switching is higher than most people realize. Because every time that you pivot any aspect of your business that's associated with your brand, you're starting over and you're going back to zero where it's the hardest, where people don't know you, where you've got to like reestablish those things. And so it's the hardest. You get the least amount of return on your effort. Now, it's the same, like I look at it, it's the same compounding principle that you get money, right? If you park your money in a reliable, not granted with disclaimers, like I'm not a financial advisor, blah, blah, blah. But if you park your money in a reliable market fund and let it compound, like virtually always that is going to give you a better return than if you're constantly moving money around, like chasing the latest trends or trying to get the latest hack or whatever it is. Because when you're doing that, you're starting over, you're potentially losing money, you're absorbing costs. There's all these other factors that go into it. Um, Side note on this, like the Warren Buffett had a public bet with a really high performing hedge manager on this very same concept and said, I'll put money in the S&P and just let it sit. You go ahead and actively trade as much as you want, and we'll see who wins, like in the long run. And Warren Buffett won that bet because when like the staying power and the consistency and the compounding and not absorbing fees and not starting over, those things just outperform. Same thing with your brand. Like if you're frequently or or worse, like if you're just perpetually, if you're always pivoting what you're doing or who you're talking to or what you're offering, it confuses your market. And it's a really good way to keep you in this state of marketing that has the lowest return on your effort at the beginning. Like think of it exponentially and then like not literally, but literally. I don't know if that's a word. Anyway, it's like think of that and on an exponential curve, the lowest return is going to be over here. So every time you pivot, you're back over here, right? So the thing is, if you want to minimize the cost of vision switching in your business, then you've got to make fewer mistakes. And that's like, okay. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Like I get it. And it sounds obnoxiously simple, but every day I talk to entrepreneurs, I talk to solopreneurs that are making decisions about their tech stack, about the tools that they're using, about the platforms that they want to use. And they're just doing it like on a whim, or they're changing, their headlines, they're changing their bios, they're changing website copy every single month. Or they're switching their focus between different markets, like as quickly as their mood changes, or it's the shiny object syndrome. But I've been guilty of it myself. And generally speaking, when I'm talking to people like that, it's impulsive. Like these things that are helping you establish your brand, the decisions that are being made impulsively, and that becomes the brand, right? So if you want to make fewer mistakes, there's three things that I recommend to my clients to help like make fewer mistakes, minimize the cost of vision switching on your business, and build a deliberate brand as an expert. Okay. So the three things. One is do less but better. And this is actually I stole this. I say this frequently, and it's from the book Essentialism. And if you haven't read the book, I'll put a link below. Like absolute must read. I've gifted it hundreds of times. I've read it probably a dozen times. And when we say do less but better, it's referring to the tendency to want to overcommit, to try to do too many things, to end up doing like as you're trying to do too many things, you end up doing the ones that you're doing. It's all hastily, it's half cocked, it's half assed, right? You're not giving the best that you can. So do less but better. Because when you're spread too thin, guess what that leads to? It leads to bad decisions that you've got to go back and fix later. You've got to go back, pivot, and correct it later. Okay. So do less but better. Second one is create a decision impact filter. And so before you make a decision on anything that's associated with your brand or anything that's of relevance really in your business, before you make a decision and start, taking action, take a step back, pause, and determine what do you actually want to come out of this decision? Like, what do you actually want to happen as a result of making the decision that you're making? What do you want to accomplish? What does success look like? How are you going to measure it? Right. Dan Sullivan has a really good tool called the impact filter, which I'll also link to below. But this is another great way to avoid making mistakes and avoid having to pivot later. The third one is as simple as it sounds, sleep on it, right? The entrepreneur in us usually wants to accomplish more than we realistically can and faster than is realistically possible. It's why we're semi crazy as entrepreneurs. But it's a strength a lot of times. It's why we're doing what we're doing, but it's also a weakness. So as blasphemous as this may sound to some people, the key to making fewer mistakes is a lot of times it's just a matter of taking the time to sit on an idea, think it through, and not act on it. Sleep on it. Like sometimes a day, sometimes a week. But when you do that, when you get comfortable pausing, it'll help you avoid making a mistake that could set you back months or even years. Right. So three things again: do less but better, like create a decision impact filter, and sleep on it. All right. And when you've made the deliberate decisions this way and they don't pan out, by all means, pivot. Like, I'm not saying, stay the course on a shitty path, but don't overuse the pivot. It's because if you use that as a crutch, or as an excuse for like lazy decision making, the cost long term is very, very high. And it's oftentimes hard to quantify the cost of those pivots. And sometimes those are the most dangerous costs, the ones that you can't quantify. So I hope this has been helpful. And until next week, till next Tuesday, that's all I got.